Chapter 3 Family. It's kind of a loaded word, family. No doubt it conjures some intense feeling in you. Is it joy? Maybe it's longing, anger, or defeat. Maybe you're content with what you've got, but you wouldn't really call it great. Like it or not, your family is a part of you, and you're a part of them. You may not associate with them anymore. Perhaps you see them every day, or you're somewhere in between. That's where I think most people are. There's a sense of obligation to them, even if it's begrudgingly. I have to, we say. They're my family. It's something almost all of us have said at one point or another. Even if you never had a family to call your own, the word still means something to you, because it means something to belong to a family. The family is often the source of everything we take for granted. We typically learn the language of our family, and our values and beliefs, both about ourselves and the world in general, begin in the family. The question of nature versus nurture is rather amusing to me, because for the vast majority of us, the same people provide both our genes and our environment, so one way or another, they're going to have influenced the person we become. A person typically gets 18 years of conditioning from their family, instilling certain beliefs and enforcing certain rules, especially the unspoken rules of the family. My mom often jokes that therapy is unnecessary because it's obviously the mother's fault, and the therapist just gets paid to agree with the client on that. Multi-generational family therapy isn't about doling out blame, but about determining which unhelpful patterns are being passed down in the family so that family members can acknowledge their shared fear or pain and let it go. Rather than talk about problems openly, many families seem to prefer taking the let's just pretend it isn't there approach, as though sweeping it under the rug really makes the problem go away. According to Mark Wolynn, author of It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle, a lot of us are carrying baggage that belongs to someone else in our family. When someone in the family suffers or causes someone else to suffer, it throws off their homeostasis, and the family members often don't know how to handle it, so they try to move past it ASAP. Those misplaced feelings end up on someone else in the family, and they end up suffering in the same way as the previous relative. Glennon Doyle, or previously Glennon Doyle Melton, describes a similar set of behaviors in her memoir, Love Warrior. Essentially, a family is playing hot potato with their pain until it lands with someone who doesn't know how to carry it or pass it on. Glennon writes about her experience of being bulimic and with alcoholism, and how she had to let go of pain that wasn't hers to carry. Wolynn discusses his experience in helping clients to do the same. There's so much more to a family than you may have imagined, especially when there's so many people to keep track of and so much that isn't talked about, as was the case with mine. After finishing both of the books that I mentioned above, I started thinking about the patterns that were present in my family. Addiction, same-sex attraction, avoidance, guilt and shame, and cutting people out. One interesting pattern I noticed was that on my mom's side of the family, the second son is always gay. I'm my parents' third kid, but the second son. And my mom's sister's second son is gay, and their brother, my uncle, is also gay. My other uncle on my mom's side has a daughter and a son, but it would be interesting to see if his son would be gay if he'd had another one. When I told my mom this, she said she'd recently noticed the same thing. We got to talking about it, and I mused aloud that it's a shame I couldn't know for sure if the pattern continued in the generations preceding my mom, because being gay almost certainly wasn't talked about then. My mom remembered that one of her grandpas had a younger brother, the second son, who ran away to South America and was never really talked about. She said she'd never thought about it before, and that she was now curious as to whether that was why he ran away. Interesting side note, my uncle, who is gay, also ran away from the family for some time when he was younger, and though he eventually came back, it seems possible that the unspoken attitudes towards my great great uncle landed on my uncle's lap, and he reacted the only way he'd had modeled for him. I remember feeling like I didn't belong in my family as far back as preschool. This concern intensified a few years down the road when things were said that played on that feeling. On one or two occasions, when she got especially mad, my mom told me that I was a burden on my family and that they'd all be better off without me. She later apologized for what she said, but she couldn't undo the damage that it had caused. I became extra sensitive to exclusion and rejection, and though I didn't know it at the time, I was slowly building up my own walls, rejecting everyone else before they had a chance to reject me. I didn't yet know that I was gay, but I knew I was different somehow. I became worried that there was something others could sense in me that I didn't know was there, like when you have food in your teeth and no one tells you. Before I could even articulate my fear, it was running the show. I thought that I had to keep myself closed off and not let anyone know the truth about me, something I didn't yet know about myself, because if others knew my secret, I would be rejected and disowned. Needless to say, that's a lot for a little kid to carry. When I learned about my great-great-uncle, it seemed quite possible that his rejection and the feelings of forced solitude that came with it landed on my lap since they were never resolved. I imagine I also carry some of my mom's pain because I identify so strongly with her. We're both the third child, and that some of her pain is probably inherited from her mother or an aunt or grandmother who took on the pain of someone else before her. Recognizing the pain you're carrying that isn't yours is the first step in letting it go, and a big part of my healing process has been to determine what I can let go of because it's only weighing me down. Turns out there's a lot. I felt like a weight was lifted off my chest after that talk with my mom because I was suddenly able to identify the potential source of my anxiety and fear. It was like the more I got to know my family, the less I felt disconnected from and mad at them. I was becoming differentiated. It was strange how I suddenly felt so connected to my family. It's like that old adage, ask God to teach you patience and he gives you a line at the bank. In lamenting feeling so disconnected from my family, our shared pain was brought to my attention, and I felt more compassion towards others in my family. For so long, I'd openly judged and criticized my family and extended family because I had opinions on how they should be dealing with their pain. As a therapist that I once saw regarding my family told me, now you're just shooting on yourself, and that's only going to make a mess. Maybe they should be dealing with their pain differently, but is that really my problem? Nope. Maybe I should be dealing with my pain differently, which certainly doesn't involve judgment. Glennon reminds us in her memoir that if we're judging others, we aren't loving them, and if we're loving them, we're not judging them. My unwelcome critiques of my family members caused the disconnect I disliked, and if I was willing to just give that up, I could have the relationships with them that I longed for. It seems so simple in retrospect, but of course I had to learn this the hard way. Multi-generational family therapy looks at the ways families, or specifically nuclear family emotional units, as Murray Bowen terms them, handle their shared pain. They almost never openly address and then properly grieve the problem. If they did, Bowen wouldn't have developed his theory. Some families are so enmeshed in each other's lives that the members can't tell which problems are theirs from which belong to others in the family, and tension often runs high. The show Modern Family is an amusing example of an enmeshed family, and though they always make up by the end of the episode, Their over-involvement in each other's lives is clearly unhealthy. It's a smart show, and the characters often express awareness of how they're repeating patterns that started in the Pritchett family, causing me to wonder how much the creators of the show and the writers know about this model of therapy. At the end of the spectrum opposite of enmeshed families are those that are disengaged. These families are minimally involved in each other's lives, if at all, and there is often locational distance accompanying the emotional distance. Enmeshed families create more problems in their hasty and panicked attempts to deal with the family drama, while disengaged families practice avoidance, denial, and cutoffs. It's kind of like Survivor, except everyone is actually related. If someone breaks the rules, and, of course, the unspoken rules matter more, they are voted off the island, as was possibly the case with my great-great-uncle. People can also choose to vote themselves off the island if they decide they're done with everyone. There may be alliances, and individuals are often more concerned with their own interests than those of the whole family. Arrested Development is the best example I can think of, with a disengaged family that still talks to each other, though I don't doubt there are better examples. The Bluth family seem enmeshed because they are all involved in each other's lives, but it's a mostly resentful and reluctant involvement in which each person is typically only trying to get something from the others. They tend to only show concern for another person if the other's circumstances directly affect their own, clearly indicative of a family that could be a little closer. Murray Bowen believed in a middle ground between enmeshed and disengaged, where families can balance emotion and reason and openly discuss and resolve problems. When this doesn't happen, pain gets passed around like a hot potato. Wolin writes in It Didn't Start With You that what's hidden from sight and mind seldom disappears. It's rarely an issue of whether a family has problems, but of how they deal with them. The show This Is Us does a fantastic job of highlighting the different ways family members deal with pain and stress. Some drink, some blame and hate themselves, some suppress it, some like to live in complete denial, and some are incredibly direct. Tragedy can bring people closer or tear them apart. Sometimes people will say things they didn't mean to say, but can't take back, and other times they'll realize how important the people in their life are to them. It's hard to look at your pain, to acknowledge it and sit with it, but when two or more people can do this with and for each other, they come out stronger and closer on the other side of it. The characters in This Is Us have experienced a great deal of loss and heartbreak, and each takes their own time and journey to come to terms with it. When they deal with it together, they tend to gain a better understanding of both themselves and the other person. As the show starts out, adult siblings Kevin and Kate seem enmeshed in each other's lives, while Kevin and his brother Randall are clearly awkwardly disengaged. Kate and Randall appear to have a healthy level of involvement in the other's life, indicating that a family is not necessarily all enmeshed or all disengaged. There tends to be an overall feeling in the family, but each possible dyad will have its own measure of closeness or distance. In one episode, someone remarks to Kevin that he reminds him so much of his father, Jack. They said, "You are Jack Pearson's son. You have him inside of you, and when you're nervous, all you have to do is remind yourself of that. Think about what he'd do, and you'll be fine." Later in the episode, Kevin is there for his brother when he needs him most, something previously uncharacteristic of Kevin, but something their father Jack would have done without hesitation. Regardless of how we feel about this fact, half of our chromosomes come from our biological father, and the other half come from our biological mother. When we are raised by these same people, it is almost inevitable that parts of us will be extensions of who they are or were. I often joke that I got my mom's personality and my dad's work ethic, and that if it were the other way around, I'd be screwed. My mom finds that one funnier than my dad does. Go figure. My parents, like all parents, are imperfect people. They have strengths and flaws, vices and virtues, and they did the best they could with what they had. I inherited certain things from each of them, like characteristics, predispositions, and preferences, and other things were learned along the way. Not everything I learned was good. If Wolin is correct, and I inherited family trauma from my mom, unconsciously attempting to take on her pain, then it also shaped who I am. That's what happens in families. By identifying with my mom, I learned to deal with pain and stress the same way she does, repeating behaviors that she probably learned from an older family member she identified with most. But I'm not my mom, just as I'm not my dad, and the way they do things isn't the only way to do them. As I've gotten older, I've had more and more moments where things my dad said when I was younger suddenly make sense, like, if you're going to do something, you may as well do it well, and you spend more time complaining about the task than it would take for you to actually do it, so just get it over with and you can get back to having fun sooner. I'm so glad to be his son sometimes, because I'm reminded in moments like these that I have had responsible behavior modeled for me my whole life. Because of him, I often know what the responsible choice looks like. This is not to say I'm not proud to be my mom's son. She is not the same person as she was when I was younger, and I'm really proud of who she has become. I'm thankful for a lot of what I got from her, just as there are some things I got from my dad that I wished I hadn't. I'm part of my family through and through. For a while, I shaped myself by being the exact opposite of my parents in every way, but even then, I was still being influenced by them. I eventually had to accept that I had to take the good with the bad, and that they weren't wrong about everything. I've learned a lot more about life in general, about my family, and about myself since opening up to the idea that we could, in time, be the family I've always wanted. Now, I was a strangely perceptive child, and, like Glennon, I wondered why people so often said one thing when they so clearly felt differently. I became even more confused when other people didn't call others out for this. It seemed to me, at 5 years old, that the punishment should match the crime, regardless of who committed it. I was very sensitive to injustices, and if a sibling got let off the hook more easily for doing something that I was punished for, I thought it should be discussed. Unsurprisingly, my parents didn't always feel that they owed me an explanation. As is often the case when someone thinks things should be a certain way, I was rather bitter regarding much of what took place in my childhood. I thought a lot of things were inconsistent and unfair, and I held on to a lot of anger for a long time. At some point in my early 20s, it occurred to me that my anger wasn't benefiting anyone, least of all me, so I let it go. The past could not be changed, and I didn't need to let the unhappiness from my childhood rob me of joy in the present. Letting go of this anger was a big step forward because it opened me up to feel other things in its place and to see things through a different lens. I'll leave you with this as we jump into our first model of family therapy. During Sylvester Stallone's arc on This Is Us, he tells Kevin, "In my experience, there's no such thing as a long time ago. There's only the memories that mean something, and the memories that don't." In holding on to anger, I held on to memories of my childhood that are maybe not worth remembering. I didn't like that taking a trip down memory lane was often a painful experience, so I decided that the memories that hurt don't mean nearly as much as the ones that brought a smile to my face. It's so easy to let anger wash over everything and prevent me from seeing things more objectively, but that's not how I want to remember things anymore. My childhood was not all bad, And in finally letting go of the memories that made me sad or mad, I found myself remembering a lot of inside jokes and little things that are specific to my family. It turns out the joyous memories really are the only ones that mean anything all these years later, after all.